Ep.6, 1932, the bonus they never got. I marched on Washington, but I never got what I came for. They said we were heroes. But when the war ended, we just became invisible. I wasn't Sergeant Walker anymore. I was just a man with holes in his boots, sleeping next to his children on a dirt floor. When the banks collapsed, so did my last thread of pride. My wife fed the kids while skipping her own meals. I sold my medals for bread, my uniform for rent. And still, it wasn't enough. Then someone said, they owe us the bonus. Remember? I had almost forgotten. Congress had promised us money back in '24 for our service in the Great War. But they said we couldn't collect until 1945. 13 more years? How do you wait for justice when your kids are starving now? I laughed when I first heard it. Not because it was funny, but because it was all so ridiculous. I wasn't sure I'd live that long. Plenty of us weren't sure. Pneumonia took one of mine last winter. Not in battle. In a frozen shack in Kansas. So we marched. From every corner of the country. I walked from Missouri with blisters so deep, I stopped feeling them. Others hitchhiked, snuck on trains, pushed carts. A man from Kentucky pulled a wagon with his daughter in it. Said she hadn't eaten a full meal in 3 days. We called it the bonus march. They called us a mob. But we came anyway. We set up camp on the muddy flats of the Anacostia River. Thousands of us. Tents made from scrap wood, old signs, worn-out tarps. There were men reading Bibles by firelight. Women boiling whatever they could find. Children learning to be quiet when their stomachs growled. Some men still wore their faded uniforms. Others burned them out of shame. There was a man beside me who whispered in his sleep every night. Gas, gas. He hadn't fought that war alone. But now, he slept alone and hungry. We built a city of the forgotten. A city of hope and exhaustion. We shared everything. Bread, blankets, even stories. Especially stories. There was one night we sang old marching songs. Some of us cried while singing. It felt like remembering who we used to be. Every morning we walked to the Capitol steps. Held up signs. Bonus now, not in 1945. Some folks gave us apples. Some spit on us. One man tossed a quarter into a tin can and said, "There's your bonus." I didn't pick it up. It wasn't just the hunger. It was the silence. No answer. No vote. Just cold glares from behind polished glass. Congress debated. They argued about budgets and policy. But they never walked through our tents. They never held a crying child in the rain. Then it rained. And rained. Mud climbed into our beds. Babies coughed through the night. One boy died. No one asked his name. We tried to stay clean, tried to stay orderly. We appointed guards. Had a mess tent. Even wrote our own little bulletin. But newspapers called us agitators. Said we were dangerous. Said we were planning a revolt. What kind of revolt uses soup pots and lullabies? Still, we waited. Because that's what soldiers do. Even when no one's listening. Until one day, the police came. But they didn't come to feed us. Or help. They came with clubs. They came in the early morning. We thought it was just another patrol. But they didn't stop at the edge. They kept marching. Closer. Row after row, rifles in hand, gas masks on. Someone shouted, "Stay calm!" Another said, "It won't hurt us." But then the tear gas flew. And suddenly, I couldn't see. I grabbed my daughter and ran. My eyes burned like they'd been lit on fire. People screamed. Fathers trampled their own feet, dragging babies behind them. Tents burned. Toys. Blankets. Letters from home. All swallowed by smoke. I heard someone yelling for help. I turned and saw a man clutching his chest. He fell into the mud and didn't get up. No one could reach him. The gas was too thick. Too cruel. They used bayonets. On men who had once held rifles for them. on the very veterans who bled for France. They didn't ask questions. They just pushed, beat, burned. And behind them, tanks, real tanks, rolling through a city of the poor and tired, driven by young soldiers who looked like my son. Some of them cried as they advanced. I saw one lower his eyes. I forgave him without words. By noon, it was gone. All of it. Our camp. Our city. Our hope. I went back later that night. The fires were out. Only ash remained. The outline of where my tent had been. Charred shoes. A tin spoon. A piece of my daughter's hair ribbon. I stood there for a long time. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't broken, but because I didn't know how anymore. Nearby, someone was picking through the rubble. He held up a photo. A young man in uniform, arm around his wife. The corner was burned. The faces were still there. He handed it to me. "I think it's yours," he said. It wasn't, but I took it anyway. That night, I slept on the ground. No tarp, no fire, just stars above and ashes below. People started leaving after that. Some went back west. Some never left the riverbanks. I heard one man threw himself into the Potomac. Said he couldn't face his family empty-handed. A boy I'd met from Alabama disappeared. He used to hum when he boiled water. Now there was just silence. I made it back to Missouri. Eventually, walked most of the way. Arrived thinner, quieter, and older. My wife opened the door, eyes wide. She didn't ask what happened. She just pulled me inside and said, "Sit. I'll warm the stew." I still dream of Washington. Not the buildings. Not the Capitol. I dream of the little girl who slept beside me in the tent. Of the tin cup we shared. Of the sign I carried that said, "I served. Will you?" And I dream of what we never got. Not just the money, but the answer. There was no counterattack. No last stand. Just silence. We didn't fight back. We couldn't. Not because we were weak, but because we were tired. Some men wanted to go to the press. Others talked about suing the government. But most of us, we just walked away. It wasn't surrender. It was something else. Like when a man stops knocking on a locked door. Not because he gives up, but because he finally realizes no one's going to answer. I spent the next few weeks drifting. From camp to railcar to alleyway. Everywhere I went, someone had heard about Washington. But the story had changed. They were communists. They were violent. They deserved it. We weren't any of those things. We were just broke. And tired. And once, we had been soldiers. People stopped calling us heroes. Now we were bums. Troublemakers. Unpatriotic. One night in Ohio, I sat by a barrel fire with two other vets. One of them still carried his discharge papers. He kept them in a tin box, wrapped in cloth. He said, "If they ever ask, I can prove I served." But no one ever asked. Not anymore. I started writing letters to my daughter. Not to send. Just to remember her voice. I'd describe the river, the trees. And sometimes I'd lie. Say I had a real bed now. Or that the president had changed his mind. The lies hurt less than the silence. Then came news from back home. A neighbor had offered my wife a job scrubbing laundry. She took it. Said she didn't care about pride anymore. She just wanted to buy flour. That day, I made a choice. To stop waiting. To stop marching. I found work laying bricks. Hard work. Sun up to sundown. 50 cents a day. But it was something. I didn't tell people I had marched. Didn't talk about the gas or the bayonets. I became a man with calloused hands and quiet eyes. Years passed. The war faded. New ones came. New men in uniform. New promises. And then, in 1936, Congress passed the Bonus Act. They gave it to us. Too late for some. Too quiet for most. I got a check. $500. I held it like it was made of glass. I used it to fix our roof, buy shoes for my kids, and one good meal at a restaurant where no one knew my name. But no money could pay for what was lost. Not the shame, not the silence, not the fire. Years passed. The Anacostia camp became a footnote in textbooks. If it was mentioned at all, people moved on. Politicians changed. Wars came and went. But I still remembered the smell of wet canvas and the sound of boots crunching ash. Sometimes, on cold nights, I'd wake up coughing. Swear I could still feel the gas in my lungs. My wife would hold my hand and whisper, "You're home. You're here." But part of me never really left Washington. It stayed in the mud beside the river, watching tanks roll through a city of the forgotten. I visited once years later. There was no marker, no plaque, no sign that thousands had lived and lost there. Just the parking lot, some overgrown grass, and the quiet hum of traffic. I stood alone and whispered, "We were here, not for anyone else, just for me." A young couple passed by. They had no idea. Why would they? No one told them. I wanted to stop them. Say, "There was a time when men came here not to fight, but to be seen." But I stayed silent. Some truths only echo if you listen hard enough. Years later, my grandson asked me, "Did you ever do something brave?" I looked at him, so small, so full of questions. And I said, "I walked to Washington once, not to change the world, just to ask for what I was promised." He didn't understand. Not yet. But one day he might. Maybe he'll read about it. Maybe he won't. But I hope, when he's older, he remembers that silence isn't peace. That protest isn't a threat. That dignity is worth walking for. Because that's what we did. We walked. We waited. We believed. We didn't get our bonus. Not really. But we left something behind. A question. A memory. A line in the dirt that said, "We mattered."